Do you consider yourself an above average critical thinker? Well, even if you are, you might still be making a fatal mistake. A mistake that, in the past decade, has caused a massive decline in our critical thinking skills as a society. And in this video, I'm going to show you what this thinking mistake is, where it came from, and how to protect yourself from it. And I'm going to draw upon my years of experience, not only as a peer-reviewed academic, but also as a successful entrepreneur to do so. Back when I was a teenager, I was into exploring all sorts of ideas. At one point, I was into conspiracy theories, you know, the kind with the lizards. At another point, I was into alternative medicine, and I even consulted with psychics here and there. Growing up as a Catholic, I even recall asking my mom to get me a copy of the Quran for Christmas, no joke, and lo and behold, I not only received it for Christmas, I actually started reading it. Kind of ironic, right? Later on, when I got to college, I got intensely interested in the political philosophy of libertarianism, and actually considered myself a very committed libertarian for a while. I say all this not to discredit any of these ideas. In itself, entertaining an idea is a positive thing. Instead, I bring all this up to highlight that because I've been through so many transformations in my thinking over the years, I feel I have a bit of an insight as to what critical thinking truly is and why more and more people are falling prey to genuine misinformation, manipulation, and thinking traps. How many of us have heard of a few admittedly catchy terms floating around the internet? You know, phrases like escape the matrix and take the red pill. You see, in 1999, the movie The Matrix was released, and at the time, it became one of my favorite movies. In this movie, the main character Neo realizes he and everyone else are living in a computer-generated simulation. To escape the simulation, he consults with the wise Morpheus, who offers him two options. Option 1. Take the blue pill and go back to living in the simulation, or option 2, take the red pill and become liberated. Escape the matrix and live in the real world. And nowadays, many people, like Neo, are choosing to take that red pill. They see themselves as waking up to a reality they've been lied to about. And while this could sound like a very positive thing, it's actually achieving the reverse of what those who take this red pill intend. But what does it truly mean to take the red pill? And what's the problem with this kind of thinking anyway? Isn't free and independent thinking a good thing? Well, let's answer this question together by retracing the thought process of so-called red-pilled people and contrast it with the thought process of a critical thinker. And as we'll see, it's essentially the same thought process I went through when, as a teenager, I considered conspiracy theories, alternative medicine, psychic phenomena, and so on. If I retrace my own red-pilled thinking, it went kind of like this. First, I realized that I was blindly believing in mainstream thinking. In other words, I was believing everything I was being told by my society around me simply because people in positions of authority were telling me so. This in itself is actually a powerful step to take. It's actually a brave step to take. In fact, think about pretty much every scientific discovery that has ever been made. Einstein, Tesla, Darwin. All these scientists pitted themselves, one person, against an entire establishment of scientific minds. The scientist Alfred Wegener, for instance, who hypothesized the existence of continental drift, or in other words, that continents move over time, was absolutely ridiculed by the most intelligent mainstream scientific experts of his time. So yes, the essence of critical thinking is a spirit of rebellion. It's a spirit of independence and resistance to authority. And in fact, I don't think any so-called facts around us should be simply assumed to be true. We should always be questioning. But that's the key. We should always be questioning. And that's where critical thinkers and what we'll now call contrarians diverge. After I made this realization, I unknowingly diverged completely from critical thinking and became one of these contrarians. What I precisely did was take that red pill. And think about what taking the red pill symbolizes. What does taking a red pill, or even a blue pill, really mean? Well, let's revisit the wise Morpheus's proposition again. In the movie The Matrix, he tells Neo he has two choices. Take the blue pill and continue to live in blissful ignorance inside the Matrix, or take the red pill and escape the Matrix. But do you see how either option causes the same exact problem? Let's consider some things we've been taught. what might be considered the blue pill kind of thinking. Ideas such as racism is wrong, women deserve equal rights, the government exists to serve you, vaccines prevent illness, and so on. When we take this blue pill, what this really means is that these ideas are positioned as unquestionable, unexplorable, exempt from all conversation. Even though these ideas are ones I happen to agree with in general, posing any idea as unquestionable or at least untouchable as a topic of discussion caused me as a teenager to rebel, to take that red pill. Yet the red pill ended up being an even worse option. Whereas a critical thinker would move from step 1, realization, to step 2, questioning, a contrarian, or a person who takes the red pill, moves from step 1, realization, to step 2, rejection. So whereas the blue pill simply puts you back to sleep, the red pill causes you to become frenzied and agitated. Automatically you believe the opposite of what you're told. And why? Simply because an authority or mainstream thought told you so. You see the irony here? You start to conclude the government doesn't exist to serve us, it's simply a corrupt organization controlled by fill in the blank. Vaccines don't protect us, they actually cause disease. And what we've been told about racism, sexism, and all the rest, those just must be wrong too. But you see, the critical thinker realizes something important. Unlike Neo, the critical thinker, when faced with Morpheus's proposition, responds to Morpheus, "It's not just the Matrix. You too are trying to manipulate me. You offer me 2 options here, but who says there are only 2 options? If I take the blue pill, the drug inside it will force my body to do one thing. Yet if I take the red pill, the drug inside it will also force my body to do something. I don't want to be forced at all. I will take both pills from your hands and simply flush them down the toilet." But then, what is that third option? That third option is something we've briefly mentioned before. It's step 2 in the critical thinker's process: questioning. You see, it doesn't take much energy for our brains to be contrarian. We humans are inherently very lazy and like to conserve energy and calories, and simply being a contrarian takes less energy than questioning. Taking the red pill, therefore, is a perfect metaphor. Taking this pill symbolizes allowing something else or someone else to take control of us. And we allow it precisely because it requires so little energy. Yet it's the cleverest kind of manipulation. It's a kind of manipulation that calls itself free and independent thinking, while simply being just as ideologically driven as our life lived taking the blue pill. But as we'll see, it's worth investing the energy to be a truly free and independent thinker. So then, what exactly is step 2, questioning? Well, by questioning, I don't mean something superficial, such as, is racism actually bad? Do vaccines really save lives? Or is the earth actually round? You see, questioning is even more fundamental than that. The critical thinker recognizes that these questions in themselves are misleading, because, for instance, a question such as, is racism actually bad, almost seems to suggest that maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't be so helpful to certain people, or that maybe, just maybe, our race is superior in some way. These questions themselves, therefore, could be interpreted to our brain as what are called leading questions, meaning questions that are worded in such a way so as to almost presuppose a certain answer. In order to avoid falling into the biases that accompany such leading questions, we need to ask even more fundamental questions. So instead of, is racism really bad, and do vaccines really save lives, we should ask something like, is there a valid value system or method that would justify treating someone differently based upon their race? And what completely unbiased methods could I use to evaluate the safety and effectiveness of vaccines? You see, these are more neutral, and they each address something important: methods. Every question we ask, even if it's about something super fundamental, such as whether the earth is round or flat, should be what's called an epistemological question. In other words, to truly question something effectively, we should always ask some version of the question, if this is true, how would I know? What method would I use to find out? And how would I know whether the method itself is valid? If I had asked myself these simple questions as a teenager, could I have avoided believing certain things that were completely baseless? Well, I never learned methods for true critical thinking in school, and unfortunately, almost none of us learns truly rigorous critical thinking in school. And I'm saying this myself as an educator. So then what's our next step? After we ask this question, we need an answer, or at least a way of finding the answer objectively and without bias, right? Well, that's where step 3 in our process comes in. Identify a method. For millennia, philosophers have explored an extremely important and enduring question, namely, how is knowledge possible? Now, I know this sounds like a super abstract question, but sit with yourself a moment and really reflect on this. Consider the things you believe to be true. Whether that's a certain moral belief, a religious belief, a cultural belief, a scientific belief, or even the most fundamental belief that there is, namely that an external world outside of your mind exists, and you aren't, for instance, actually just a brain in a vat somewhere plugged into a computer program. This last problem, aptly called the problem of the external world in philosophy, is notably difficult to solve. In fact, to date, it's fair to say that nobody has as of yet actually proved there is an external world. In principle, it's actually impossible to prove because you'd need to use methods from the external world itself to prove it. And for that reason, we begin a method of pursuing truth and knowledge not with epistemology or a theory of knowledge, but instead with value theory, which is my own area of expertise. And what does this all mean? Well, think about it. All knowledge actually starts with a value judgment, namely, what should I believe, and what method should I use to believe it? We choose to assume there's an external world, simply because we have the experience of living in one and have no option but to operate in it. And so, in a sense, we choose to place our trust in this judgment, even though it is actually beyond our ability to grasp the truth of it for sure. And as we'll see, choosing what and whom to trust is essential for knowledge. I mean, think about all the things you blindly believe every day. You believe, for instance, when you drive to a new state or province you've never been to, that state or province actually exists and it's not just some void or black hole you're going to fall into once you get there. You trust the map makers, you trust the media who have told you this place exists, and you trust the textbooks you grew up with that have reinforced this idea to you that this place exists. When you buy coffee from the grocery store, how can you be so sure it's real coffee and not just something that's been designed to look and taste like coffee? If someone challenges the fact that you're drinking coffee, you confidently assert back to them that you are indeed drinking coffee. But how do you know for sure? Do you really know that you're drinking coffee? So then what's the point of these examples? Why focus on the idea of trust so much when it comes to knowledge and truth? Well, the point is that knowledge for us humans is not an individual phenomenon. Knowledge is not individual knowledge. It is collective knowledge. You accept that China exists, even if you haven't been there, and all because others have discovered and have presented this fact. Yet, can you be said to actually know China exists in that case? You accept the Earth is round and not flat, even if you don't know the mathematical or empirical reasons for this, and all because others you accept as more knowledgeable than you have discovered and presented this fact. Yet can you be said to actually know the Earth is round? You see, according to what's called the social brain hypothesis, humans have survived as a species in large part due to our ability to offload our reasoning process to others so that we can save energy and calories. Unlike an artificial intelligence system, we are not adapted to store terabytes of extraneous information because this would literally lead to the cognitive overloading of our brains and therefore the collapse of our species. The simple fact is, when it comes to knowledge, each of us as individuals must be humble, for when we truly reflect, we as individuals truly know almost nothing. As a species, however, we collect and accumulate knowledge, so each new individual born into the society does not have to start from scratch. So yes, while the scientific method, hypothesis testing, Bayesian reasoning, inductive reasoning, and knowledge of all the logical rules are extremely helpful for gaining knowledge, I cover these and many other methods in many other videos, so I won't cover those here. The more important question, aside from methods, as hopefully you can now see, is who should we trust? Because the truth is, we have to trust someone or something. We literally are forced to and have no choice in the matter if we want to do something as simple as get out of bed every morning. Yet when we trust, it does not mean blind trust. Remember the mistake of the contrarian versus the critical thinker. The contrarian immediately rejects socially derived knowledge, whereas the critical thinker simply attempts to reveal whether the method used to discover that socially derived knowledge is valid. There's a huge difference between these two kinds of people. So the decline of critical thinking in our current world isn't so much due to the fact that people lack reasoning ability or knowledge of reasoning method. While this is certainly a factor, pretty much everyone is capable of learning these, regardless of their intelligence levels. Instead, the decline in critical thinking, and therefore the rise of the contrarian, is due to a decline in trust. And to reverse this requires a kind of humility on all sides. A humility that we know very little. A humility that we're often wrong. A humility that we need each other for true critical thinking to occur. And so from here, it's up to you. If you want to keep leveling up your critical thinking to make a massive impact, not only on your own life, but on the lives of countless others, then be sure to watch this next video.